The Kawasaki KLR650, a legendary motorcycle that needs no fancy introductions. So, what have I learned after a decade of touring on this beast, owning a few of them and putting about 100,000 miles collectively on all of them? Stay tuned to find out. Greetings riders, Nick here with Pegasus Motorcycle Tours and Consulting. Harleys, just kidding. Zdravo I dobrodošli. Bom dia, bem-vindos. Servus und willkommen. Buenos dias y bienvenidos. Greetings riders and welcome to Pegasus Motorcycle Tours and Consulting, bringing you a complete and conclusive review of the Kawasaki KLR650, one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic motorcycles in ADV touring history. Now this review is intended to be, like I say, complete and conclusive, and I would really appreciate to hear from you too, because my experience is limited to about 10, 12 years, maybe about 100,000 miles collectively between all the KLRs I've owned. No doubt all our collective experience is so much richer, so much more valuable. So the value of this channel and of this community is that we get to share information and learn from each other. So please participate. It's a bike that I've learned to love and appreciate for all the experiences it has been able to afford me, especially as a young man touring on a very, very limited budget. For that reason, I've learned to love the bike. I've really learned everything about the bike as much as I possibly could in those 10, 12 years. So stay with me. Let's dig into the details, and hopefully by the end of this review, you have all the information you need to make a better decision to see if this bike is something you'd want to consider for your ADV touring. Two profoundly magnificent, incredibly sublimely important events happened in 1987 that would forever influence the trajectory of motorcycling. One was the birth of the KLR 650, and the other was the birth of yours truly. Just kidding. I've been always practicing my bow. I want to develop an amazing bow. That's not it. In all seriousness though, I love this bike. I love this bike because as a 24-year-old with a very, very limited budget, it afforded me such an incredible touring experience here and abroad that it just remains always with a special place in my heart. My story with the KLR is the following. Basically, I was studying in Brazil as an exchange student for a year in Rio, developing my love for speed, going down the mountains of Vista Chinesa in my homemade street luge. An incredible experience, a beautiful city, amazing place. Everybody should really visit at least once in a lifetime, because there's no city like it, with the music and the food and the people and all the chaos of the large city like that. Where I happened to meet my wife, which is now sitting home about to give birth to my child in 2 months. So, you know, let's all give a round of applause to Jackie for being such an amazing woman, you know, allowing me these awesome weekends that I can come out and film before my baby is born, you know. So I'm in Brazil, my mother calls, she says, I have cancer, I'm getting operated on in 3 days. I fly back, she gets operated in the same hospital where she works. Luckily, a ton of support and early detection made that cancer treatable. She was operated, and within a few months she was feeling much, much better. Cancer is such a horrendous disease that really touches so many. It's astounding how common it is, and I only learned this because after my mother beat cancer, I deferred a year to the University of Michigan, so I had this whole summer free. What else to do but buy a bike and go touring, camping, rock climbing, all those things that I really love to do. So I created the Pegasus Project, which was a partnership with the American Cancer Society to tour on a motorcycle, make pictures and write about my adventures and collect money for them, for all the great work that they do. Needless to say, my limited budget from being a student my whole life up to that point made a bike like this one of the only options. Luckily, I was able to pick up a Kawasaki KLR650 for about $3,500. It had just over 3,000 miles on it, so barely broken in, bone stock, original owner. That's the beauty of these machines. The proletariat nature of their availability and just the ability for anybody to pick up a KLR and ride across the world is their biggest value to motorcycling in general. It was completely stock. It had nothing. It had no engine guards, no luggage, nothing. In this regard, I got to get a shout out to Twisted Throttle. I called them and they heard my story and they shipped over some stuff directly from their KLR, the ones that you would maybe remember from motorcycle shows with all the yellow protection from SW Motec. They sent me the engine guards, the skid plate. So a huge shout out and thanks to them. They did that in 2011, my goodness, with no expectations in return. So thank you very much. Your support of the riding community is much appreciated. I come back, I ride the bike for about 4 months, put about 36,000 miles, love it, learn it inside and out. Then I ship it to Europe. Say, what's next? Let's go to Europe. I ship it to Europe. I put about 20 or so thousand miles, end up crashing in Spain, hurting the radiator so it overheats, blah, blah, blah. Leave it there because it doesn't quite make sense shipping it back and forth so many times. It's expensive, there's delays, etc. 4 years later, I come back, I kid you not. All that happened was my uncle would put it on the trickle charger whenever he remembered in those 4 years. I didn't even cover it, so his tractor brought in a bunch of dust and dirt, and the bike looked like it was 30 years old at that point. I come 4 years later, push it out of the garage, dust it off, turn the key. Within 5 minutes, the bike starts. Can't believe it. 4 years. 4 years. I used it for the rest of that summer with my wife in the back, exploring the incredible Adriatic coast, a place you really ought to visit. If you're ever in Europe and you miss it, it's a sin. What do you think? Look at that.
I'm gonna cry, I think.
So make sure you hit that up for sure. All the way from Italy. You can even take a ferry from the Adriatic coast of Italy across to Croatia, Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia. Just incredible. The Balkans are just a different world, you know. So let me tell you what I love about this motorcycle. Well, for one, it's very capable. You can go anywhere, literally. It doesn't do anything particularly well. You probably know this by now. So it's got very limited suspension travel for serious off-road riding. It's fairly heavy for serious dirt. It's about 432 pounds. It's got a massive 6-gallon tank, which is incredibly heavy to have on top, but the range is upwards of 300 miles a tank, so you can really go far. Distances are not a problem for this bike. The fairings on the second generation make it fairly aerodynamic. That's the main difference between it and the first generation, which was ended in 2007 was the last year. 2008 was the first year of the second generation with the fairing, improved brakes to some extent and some other little goodies here and there, but mostly it was the fairing and the power that was slightly increased on the second generation of the KLR. Due to all the additional plastic to protect it, you'll need a engine guard. So the suspension on the bike is fairly limiting, to be honest. You're looking at about 7.9 inches of travel. I think that's about 200 millimeters of travel in the front, less in the rear. So what you get is a suspension that's actually very soft. The first upgrade that you probably will need to make after adding the skid plate and the engine guard to protect the plastic is to upgrade the suspension, because everybody will complain it's a little too soft. Now, I won't complain that because I did everything I did on my KLR when it was completely stock. I'm lighter, I'm 165 pounds, and with a fair amount of weight, I found the bike completely malleable. It did what I needed to do, but is it soft? Yes, it's very soft. This bike, for that reason, has upgraded suspension. They're progressive in front and rear, and they do wonders to make this bike much, much more responsive. Another thing that's going to really affect the responsiveness of the feel of the front wheel in particular is a fork brace. I would really say for this bike it's kind of mandatory, because you have these really thin 41 millimeter suspension forks that really twist, you know, especially if you have a lot of weight on the bike and you hit some gnarly rocks and stones, and it'll flick your front wheel one way or the other, and you'll have to catch yourself. You'll definitely notice it. So if you have a fork brace like I've installed on this bike, it'll make it so much more responsive and so much easier to predict what the front wheel is doing and what it's going to do in big dips, in really, really gnarly off-road situations. So I believe that's probably one of the more common and more affordable upgrades for the suspension of this motorcycle. Now, it comes with a skid plate. The skid plate is plastic and it's likely to break the first time it contacts the ground. So that's considered a pretty common upgrade, pretty necessary upgrade. You have plenty of options. The market is flooded. That's one of the best things about this bike. It's like a Jeep Wrangler. There's just so much that you can add on this bike to make it truly your own. So it's powered by a 650 single cylinder, dual overhead cam, 44 horsepower, 36 foot-pounds of torque thumper. I mean, it's a fairly smooth engine for being such a large thumper, but it does burn some oil. It's known to burn oil, especially the 2008 models had an issue with the piston rings. I actually got in touch with Kawasaki. They actually were kind enough to offer to replace the piston ring if I wanted to when I was on the road touring, but never really found that to be much of a deal. You always carry extra oil anyways. It's not a big deal. It is a thumper, so it does vibrate, but I find it doesn't vibrate as much as my GS 650. Interestingly enough, it also shifts much smoother than my BMW, something I was completely astounded by. The shifting gears are really smooth. They're predictable, they're positive, there's no phantom neutrals anywhere in between like there is in my GS, which is very interesting. I didn't expect that at all. This bike shifts much better than my BMW F650 GS or G650 GS, both bikes that I've had that have the same issue. It's a 5-speed and it would benefit from a 16-tooth sprocket up front just to help lower the RPMs at higher speeds, especially with weight. You know, that'll help. As for the longer service intervals, this bike has one main work that you need to consider, and that's the valve clearance job. Valve clearance job is due, I believe, at 15,000 and then again at 30, something to that effect. They also recommend one earlier on. Every time I've done it, it's been in spec and it's a pain in the butt to do. You have to remove all the plastics, the seat, the tank. Hopefully it's empty because 6 gallons of tank is a lot of weight to mess around with. And then you have to remove the top end of the bike, you know, disassemble, cover it so nothing falls into the case itself, and check these little annoying shims. The most annoying part of it is that if you're in spec, great, you put it together, be on the road again. If you're not in spec, you need to have shims that are going to accommodate the change that you need to add. So you need to have those new shims already in hand. And it's hard to know what you're going to need, so you need to buy a whole set of shims that are fairly, you know, sizable and fairly heavy for stuff that you really need to use only once in the lifetime on the engine, maybe twice. So that's the annoying part. The DR650 by Suzuki does a better job in making you able to do this job, to check the valve clearance without having to do all this preliminary work, and I like that more. So take a look. I do a very detailed comparative review of the KLR650 and the DR650. That's one of our most popular videos, and a lot of people really have responded well to it, so please take a look. It is obviously liquid cooled. It has a radiator that's maybe a positive or a negative, depends how you look at it. Liquid cooled engines are supposed to be more reliable, last longer. They do add more weight, and it's another thing that, you know, can potentially break, like it did on mine when I crashed in Basque Country, and I cracked the radiator and it's leaking to this day and it overheats. So the bike is actually fairly slow, to be honest. In my experience, that was a positive, because you can imagine, as a 22, 23-year-old man full of testosterone and just full of life, touring on a motorcycle like this is probably the reason I came home in one piece. It's slow. It's forgiving of your obnoxiousness wanting to really take the twisties. The brakes are adequate, but they're very weak, so it forces you to ride slower, to enjoy the scenery, which is the positive. I mean, it's good to enjoy the twisties every now and then, but motorcycling in general is, I dare say, a game of probabilities almost. So if you're touring for a long period of time and you have this massive machine underneath you that you're pushing the limits of, one can argue it's just a matter of time before you eat it. This bike doesn't allow for that. The power is not there. There's just enough power to give you what you need, especially if you're riding abroad in places where, you know, we're not used to such fast highways. This can go 70 miles an hour all day long. But riding abroad, mostly you're going to notice that you're riding roads that do not allow those kinds of speeds. So this bike is plenty powerful enough to meet all those needs when you're touring abroad especially. The key here is to simply seek smaller more interesting roads, get off the highway, get off the urban areas, get off the places where you can hear cars passing by. You want to go where the cows are the only thing you see for the whole day. That's where this bike shines. And you know that if you get caught in a dirt road that turns really nasty all of a sudden, then this bike can get you out of there. That's the main thing. You won't enjoy riding dirt on this bike. It's not gonna do any bunny hopping. That's not what it's intended to do. It's intended to get you out of any sticky situation and bring you home. One thing I really love about the motorcycle is that you can really pack it down. It's like a mule. I mean, there's endless possibilities of adding luggage to this bike. Here you see a magnetic tank bag on top. It's a moto-centric. I like it because it has straps. I can take it off and use it as a backpack when I'm off the bike, when I'm doing some light hiking, for example. I actually used two triangular tank bags. One was, for example, the Joe Rocket Manta. The other one is made by Cycle Gear, the Suzuki brand. So they fit there perfectly. They make your legs a little bit more open and catch the wind. But if you need absolutely more luggage, that's one way to add it. There's actually plenty of space here for a few more items, maybe some smaller toiletries bag or something to that effect. Just make sure you're not obstructing the range of motion of the handlebars, obviously. I also add a Bell brand bicycle bag on the crossbar of my handlebars. It allows me to place maybe my glasses or my camera, a smaller DSLR, for example. I use a Samsung NX10, NX20 line. It's very, very small, but very, very great camera, although I'm not a big Samsung fan. And I put that here because it's so convenient. I can just pull off the side of the road, take a picture and be on my way. Sometimes it's really inconvenient and inopportune to stop on the side of the road and fairly dangerous, so you want to do it as quickly as possible. So you can fit another bag here. It's got this big flat seat and a flat, supposedly 22-pound limit. So I had to change cameras because my second GoPro 8 is just overheating and it just cannot take the challenge, and I really think GoPro needs to address this issue because I'm tired of losing my footage to these kinds of problems. It freezes, it stops working, it overheats, you know, the little plastic parts break. Just get with it, fellas and ladies. I respect what you do, but we need a better product here. So anyways, we were talking about the luggage carrying capacity of the KLR650. As I mentioned, so you have this massive tank that allows you for up to even 3 tank bags, one on each side, one on top. The flat seat and the flat luggage rack in the back really allows for a very stable way to carry a pack. Now I carry a pack because I do a lot of hiking and rock climbing and that kind of thing when I'm touring, so I like to be able to have something that I can carry, you know, and camp out maybe deeper in the woods for a night or two. All my stuff is there. It's very functional, and please take a look at all our videos. It's a series that reviews everything you need to be carrying when it comes to camping and kitchen and sleep and tools and all of those details. We do a specific video series that discusses each of those topics, so please take a look. Hopefully you learn a thing or two, and hopefully I learn from you as well. So that's how I like to carry it. These are the Moose Racing Expedition cases, massive 47-liter cases on each side. I was always debating, do I like soft or do I like hard? To be honest, the hard luggage cases are more convenient in so many ways. You can carry more, it's more organized. And again, I do a review of these cases. They are connected to the bike with Tusk removable carrier racks. It was actually an experience to see how it would work, and it actually works quite well. I'm really, really happy with how it came out. Another benefit of these large bags on a bike like this is that when it falls over, because it's so top heavy, they're so wide that they prevent the bike from falling over so much that it's difficult to pick up. It's always difficult to pick up for sure. Today I laid it down, you can kind of see right here. I messed up. The rear wheel was way off the ground. I laid it in a very, very hard part of some gnarly dirt, but I was able to pick it up and actually lean it against the other one because I couldn't set my side stand. So they're useful in a few different ways and clearly very durable. Again, take a look at that particular video. We're not going to talk about that. In fact, I'm going to remove it now. And you see how easily it comes off, so you can see the bike a little better. Here you also see a welding rod holder. You can actually fit 2 behind that front wheel. In it I have some heavier tools, longer tools. It can fit a bottle of wine if you're visiting somebody, you're somebody's guest for the night, maybe you're couch surfing. It's always polite and, you know, nice to bring something, and a bottle of wine is something everybody enjoys. Or maybe you yourself at the campground at night, you can fit that in one of these. These are about 12 bucks at Lowe's with the, you know, the ring clip, and you're all set. So it's kind of neat. I really like them. They're very durable. We have rubber foot pegs. This is also a common upgrade, and I've actually removed the tusk foot pegs from this bike. I wanted to see if they fit on my BMW G650 GS, the sertao, and they do. A lot of the things that off this bike fit directly on the BMW 650, which is interesting, including the mirrors, the foot pegs, and as well I removed the tusk handguards. They fit bolt straight onto the G650 GS, including the F650 GS as well, from 2003 all the way to 2015, I believe. So it's kind of neat. Don't take my word for it quite yet. Make sure you do your research, because this is just my experience. Tusk on their website of Rocky Mountain, for example, doesn't mention anything that these two bikes will have the same battery, for example, and the same equipment, but they do. It comes with these plastic handguards. For any serious adventure touring, you're going to need to replace that with something that's going to protect your hands in case of a fall and protect your levers as well. The mirrors are big and round, unattractive, but very functional. I replaced them. These are actually mirrors from my BMW G650 GS sertao. Please take a look at that motorcycle review, because that's a direct competitor to this bike, and it's a bike that I definitely will continue to own, because in a lot of ways it's much better than this bike, even though they're direct competitors. But to find out more details, please watch that review. The bike is very easy to work on. The engine is known because of its reliability, and that's the beauty of it. It's not something you have to tinker with too much. Of course, I always carry the book with me that everybody needs to carry on trips like ours, because there'll be a time where you're gonna have to use it. My main gripe with the bike is the carb. I hate carb work. I just don't like having to clean out the carb every month or two. If you're putting a bunch of miles, if you're living on the road, it's gonna be such a common thing that it's gonna really blow your brains every time you have to stop in some dusty village somewhere, because the bike is really struggling and you can't handle it anymore. This doesn't only happen in dusty villages somewhere. I picked up bad gas in Georgia and had to stop in Florida and take the tank out, just dump it and clean it out, because if you get any water in the gas, it's never going to really evaporate or anything, or burn out. You have to really just dump it out, dry it out, and clean it out. So I really dislike carb work. It's one of my least favorite things about motorcycle maintenance, but some of you might not think that's a handicap like I do. Maybe you enjoy the reliability of the traditional carb, and I respect that. Good on you, but I would prefer not to have it. That's the main benefit, main reason why I switched to the G650 GS, and also for the weight distribution. Here, it's very top heavy. You feel it. You're throwing it around. It's basically throwing you around. In corners, you're just kind of anticipating what it's going to do rather than you doing it. That's the cost of having all that weight up top. The BMW G650 GS and F650 GS, they all put the weight underneath the seat, and it's such a better option, to be honest, because the weight is so much lower. You feel way more capable to maneuver that motorcycle, especially off-road on very difficult terrain. I've noticed it really prefers better oil. So for example, when I was in Italy, the only oil able to get my hands on was Motul, a Spanish red tinted oil, and I thought it was very interesting. It was quite expensive too. I think it was around 18 euros a quart, and it loved that motor oil. It was very interesting. It shifted so much better. There are a few things that you need to upgrade on the second generation from the start. The main thing is the doohickey. Make sure you change that and you have a peace of mind, because the spring on that is known to break, and then it's bouncing around in your case, and of course that's not good. So I'll be perfectly honest, my European KLR with 40,000 miles on the clock has all original parts. The only thing I did change was this subframe bolt. You should change that into a more sturdy one, into a stronger bolt, because those bolts are known to break. Another thing that would really help is a little bit taller screen. This windscreen does the job, but not very well. They very inconveniently also neglect to include a gas gauge. That's annoying, because every adventure touring bike really ought to have a gas gauge. Sometimes I'm in the desert and you know, in these empty riverbeds, these arroyos, and they all look alike. And the desert is this vast openness, and there's a bunch of these old ancient dry riverbeds that are meeting, and you need to take one of them to get to your next destination. It would be very nice to know when you are in the desert, so far away from services, that you are, you know, with enough gas, that you don't undercalculate. I did burn a few things, including a jacket sleeve on the exhaust, so be sure not to be throwing your jacket over your seat unless you have something created here, an extender that protects from that happening, or such as this Tusk removable pannier rack. It will, you know, help prevent you burning your rock straps or your backpack straps or any clothing items that might fall over your exhaust. The stock seat is very uncomfortable, period. Nothing more to be said there. I just got used to dealing with it, even after trying the sheepskin, the gel pad, the Airhawk. All of those items just lifted me more off the ground, and it's already a high bike at about 35 inches. So it's definitely not for the shorter riders out there, because you're not going to be able to reach the ground. And if you're tippy toes on this bike, it's difficult because all the weight is so high, especially with the tank, especially the way that I have it geared up now, that any unsure footing is going to probably result in a tip over. Nothing will really happen. They created these items that are going to contact to be flexible so they don't break, and I appreciate that. Unlike, again, my BMW G650 GS, I passed by and I caught my blinker with my elbow and I broke it, and it's just absurd. I mean, those things should not happen, so I appreciate Kawasaki dealing with it in the proper way. The only problem I really had with my KLR is that the wire feeding the neutral light, the green light on your dash, was rubbing against the subframe of the headlight unit. I couldn't see that. I never took the headlight unit off. Eventually it shorted the circuit, so it took a while for me to figure that out. I was very fortunate. This happened in a little town called Jackson, California, and a gentleman on a big Goldwing stopped and said, "Do you need help?" And I said, "I have no idea what's going on over here. It's 104 degrees. I'm just cooking, and I know it's electrical, but electrical is so difficult to diagnose." And he was kind enough to welcome me to his home. Him and his wonderful wife, they fed me for 2 days while we try to figure this problem out. Turns out, in this tiny town with no motorcycle shops, here's a motorcycle mechanic working from his home garage with about $50,000 worth of tools and a lift, and he only works on Goldwings, and he was able to locate this problem. I don't think it's a common problem. I actually haven't heard too many people talk about it, but it's something to consider, because, you know, it could happen to you, your KLR, so just keep it in mind. You'll know when your bike dies all of a sudden riding down the road, so check that out. It's a wire that feeds the neutral light. Other than that, the bike has been awesome. I mean, I have no qualms about owning it and taking it anywhere. It's a bike that you know will get you out of any situation. Maintenance is super easy. Oil changes take 10 minutes. You have a little window here, you have the filter here. Make sure you're supplied with filters before you head on a big long trip, because you never know if they're going to be easy to find or not. Whenever you remove the plastics, things are bound to disappear. So what I always do is, for example, the little gussets that are found on the seat hole where you punch the bolt through will fall out. So just immediately take your seat. It's a metal gusset, so make sure you super glue it. Honestly, super glue is your best friend when it comes to the KLR. All these little bolts are bound to get lost. What I would do is, on my 8mm socket that removes them, I had a piece of tape on the inside that would grip them as they pull out, because on this side it's actually quite difficult to put it in. If you miss it, then it's really difficult to get that bolt out of this hole, and it's extremely frustrating. Same goes with the battery bolts that hold the terminals down. Make sure you're always carrying extras, because they'll be lost on this bike and in the no man's land between the battery and the tank, and you just can't reach it anymore, and then you can't connect your batteries, so make sure you do that. Other than that, I really appreciate the fact, for example, that the mirrors, they're flexible, they bend, so you're not breaking them if you drop it, or if you hit the bike on accident when you're passing by, or brushes and bushes, branches contact it. I like the fact that you're given a shifter that pivots, so when you lay the bike down it doesn't break. That's kind of neat. My BMW doesn't have that, interestingly enough. I've had to upgrade. And another interesting fact, the tusk, foot peg, and shifter also fits on the GS. Kind of neat. They don't advertise it as such, but another thing that you're bound to lose eventually is the rubber mount on which the tank rests. It's below the tank, obviously, and it kind of enters a metal joint that looks like a C. The Dunlop tires that come on this bike are fine. You got a 21 front inch tube tire, rated poorly for wet riding, but you know, I've honestly taken them on all kind of temperatures and all kind of terrain and all kind of conditions, and they did fine. For me, I know this is going to be a slow riding bike. I'm not pushing any limits with it, and if you respect that factor, then it's actually in its benefit because you get to enjoy the scenery a little more and you get to come back safe. The brakes themselves, you have a dual cylinder in the front, single in the back. I think it's a 230 or 220 in the front, 180 in the rear. The size of the diameter of the rotor itself. They're very weak, you know. They do the job, but you just have to get used to them. You have to keep that in mind. You don't ride it like you would a more sportier, more capable motorcycle. I've experienced the weakness of these brakes in 2 occasions that were scary. One time a truck loaded with chopped firewood entered the road out of a dirt side street, and I just had a very, very hard time trying to stop in time. Same thing with the tractor one time in northern Spain, where he saw me plenty in advance, assuming I would be able to stop. There was just no way for me to stop in time. I almost got in a fight with that guy. It just really, really shook me to the core, as you say, those kinds of experiences where you stop just inches from this massive, gnarly truck or tractor wheel. The brakes on this bike are very soft. It would really benefit from a steel braided brake line. I guess that would be one of the main upgrades you could do. You could also replace the pads with the little grippier pads to notice some of the difference, but that's just the nature of the beast. You kind of have to live with it. They will overheat if you're trying to go down a hill, always applying the brakes. This is another thing I've learned. Make sure you're engine braking, put it in first gear, let the engine do the work. The engine braking on this bike is noticeably more forceful than it is on my G650 GS, the BMW, which is a direct competitor to this bike. Kawasaki did address some of the main issues about this bike, namely the seat, for example, being incredibly uncomfortable, the suspension being very soft. Namely, in 2014, the second half production motorcycles and younger addressed these issues. The suspension in the front is around 30% stiffer, which really does a lot for a bike like this. The seat is supposedly more comfortable as well. It has the Kawasaki lettering on it. So if you're looking for a KLR, definitely see if the 2014 second half of that year and younger, newer, are available, because that would be a better purchase, all things being equal. They say the cheapest thing on the KLR 650 is the rider. I take a little bit of offense to that because I love the KLR. It's a bike I've owned since 2011 when I was 22 years old. Despite owning, 20, 30 other bikes in the meantime, I keep returning to this motorcycle just because it's so capable. The KLR is the perfect motorcycle for that rider who's looking for mostly asphalt or very easy dirt and a lot of luggage carrying capacity and bulletproof reliability and a ton of aftermarket parts, no frills, not too much power, and not anything technical when it comes to handling. So a motorcycle that just goes. I think it's decent looking. A lot of people think it's ugly. I leave that to you. The older generation is a little boxier, obviously, but maybe you would feel more comfortable going in places like, I don't know, Mexico at the moment, or much of Latin America on a bike that looks older, but also performs fairly equally as well. Consider the older versions. They're everywhere. They're easy to find. For $3,000, $4,000, you can buy a Kawasaki KLR 650. And in fact, every month I notice that there's a Kawasaki with less than 1,000 miles on the clock. I've been noticing them even in that cool camo color that was only available in the last production year with, 200 miles, 300 miles. There's one with 6 miles right now on Craigslist selling for $6,000. So I would not hesitate to pull the trigger on these bikes just because they're so reliable. Even if they've been sitting for a while, just make sure that the tank is not rusted and you're set to go. If the bike turns on, you're gonna be fine. For more tips on how to purchase a used bike and what to look for, please take a look at that video. The used market offers so many benefits and it's flooded, and to be honest, especially now, unfortunately with COVID, a lot of people are looking to get rid of those toys, and you can buy some incredible motorcycles at really great prices, especially here in Southern California. The market is just astounding. That was one of the pull factors for me moving here. Take a look at that video if you're in the market for a used motorcycle. And in the meantime, stay afoot on what the market offers when it comes to the KLR. If you see a clean one that clearly hasn't been abused, you're not going to go wrong by purchasing it, because it's going to be a bike that always resells quickly and easily. There's a want for them because they have this well-deserved reputation of reliability, dependability, affordability, and ease of use and maintenance. So all that being said, I hope this review was helpful in helping you make a better informed decision. Please leave your comments. Let me know what you think, let me know what I missed, and let me know what is the thing you love most about the KLR, what is the thing you love least about the KLR, and why you still choose to keep it like I do, despite all its many faults and flaws. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and till next time, Nick, I'm out.